So can you explain what the Institute for Art and Olfaction is and how it came to be?
There's like three Genesis stories. So I'll give you the comprehensive story. So at the time where I became interested in the perfume industry, I was working at a TV network as a producer. I was in charge of getting content from people for the network and running a team of people that got content for the network. And so I was interacting a lot with filmmakers, and I had run a film festival before that. And a lot of the filmmakers were talking about the fact that the structures in the film industry and the TV industry were exclusionary, designed for, obviously there's a lot of gatekeeping. And thank God YouTube had started. So thank God there was this sort of space for democratization that was starting to impact how the filmmakers and storytellers were able to get their story out. So that's sort of what I was steeped in. I was sort of consulting, and I was on panels and stuff talking about, quote, the democratization of film and TV. And that was, of course, concurrent to my art practice. And so when I discovered the world of fragrance, the sort of industry of fragrance, it was through the good graces of a friend, David, who gave me a book called The Emperor of Scent about Luca Turin, written by Chandler Burr. And I read this book, and it was like a revelation, because all the interest I had in this sort of democratization of media, I felt hadn't been applied to the scent industry, and it hadn't, So that's sort of what was the genesis of the idea of the Institute. And then adding to that, the fact that I was an artist and I was really interested in social practice, sort of the act of intervening in something through art. So it sort of was a perfect storm of interest that led me to start the Institute. But yeah, it was a lot of factors at play, but mostly an interest in accessibility.
And if you could explain what the Institute does in just a few sentences, what would you say?
The Institute is a nonprofit devoted to experimentation and access in the field of perfume. And we accomplish this through several modes of activity: education, advocacy, and experimentation. That's my short.
Perfect.
That's short.
Perfect. So you touched upon this open access aspect of the Institute. So this is probably part of the reason why it's a nonprofit, but I was
Yeah.
curious why you made the institution a nonprofit and not something that was for profit.
Well, I mean, that gets a little bit into my personal values. We won't go into politics, but I have, a rational suspicion of our expression of capitalism, our current expression of capitalism. And particularly what I find annoying and distasteful on a personal level, and also problematic on a global level, is this idea of luxury marketing and luxury products and exclusionary practices. All that stuff just bugs me. It bugs me from just a sheer social justice perspective. So, I mean, the idea of starting yet another for-profit enterprise in perfumery and sort of like delving into that language that's, we've been sort of forced into for the last century, this idea of like, oh, it's only the best and it's very expensive and blah, 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 blah. I found it really, really, really boring, not to say that there's not a place for it, but it wasn't a place that I wanted to be in. So the Institute, the point of the nonprofit was because this is a social intervention. You know what I mean? This wasn't to create more perfume products for the world. It was to create a space where people could engage with scent in a creative capacity, which we have for millennia. Like, you don't have to engage with scent through commerce. There's other ways to engage with this. So it was for artists, basically. And so, the nonprofit format felt more appropriate for that. Plus, I was the co-director of a film festival, which is a nonprofit. And I just sort of I like the ethos of doing things for the community versus personal or institutional gain.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because perfume is like a luxury
Yeah.
product.
I mean,
So
my mom always says that I'm the only idiot who started a nonprofit in a place where people actually make money. I'm like committed to poverty. But there's
yeah,
a
but
bigger picture at stake, and it's
yeah.
okay. I can
But
hustle.
in a way that makes you super unique and makes the Institute very unique, right? Because
Yeah, I mean, but uniqueness, the thing about it, Sophia, is like you can be unique, but you also need to survive. You know what I mean? Because otherwise there's no impact. So that was sort of my second thing, was not only am I going to make this a nonprofit, but it's going to succeed. It's going to prove that you can work in this space outside of commerce and succeed and be a sort of thing people can copy. People can emulate the model that we set up. That was sort of the point, was to make sure that it wasn't just sort of sitting in the corner and then disappearing after a year, was to make it successful, and that takes a lot of care, a lot of really keeping an eye on on survival, but also fulfilling the mission. So I don't know. That's a little bit of a tangent, but
yeah, but it highlights an interesting thing that I think you've brought to this field is that, I mean, a lot of us are very inclined to hold things very closely, right? To like keep it to ourselves. But then this idea that you created an institute that you want to be copied or you want to be shared and opened for more people that's very special, I think, and well needed.
I mean, it might be abnormal in the field of perfume, but I mean, when I came to the Institute, as you know, as I just said, I was working in film. And so there was this whole narrative around information sharing, open source, peer-to-peer sharing, all that stuff that was happening in film. So for me, it was pretty obvious, you know what I mean? I mean, I know that the perfume industry has a tendency to be pretty, let's say, guarded, but since I didn't come from the industry, it didn't even occur to me that that would be an option. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.